Okay, welcome to the stream today. We've got some fun things planned. I am joined in the studio under Cat Cam. It's Corbin. Say hi to everybody, Corbin. Right here. Say hi. And wish all babies. See? Sounds like Jason Statham these days. All right. Well, welcome aboard, everybody. Hi. I hope you and yours have had a good day. A good 24 hours since we spoke last. I posted today's page. It's the one that's up on the screen right now. It is elves. The suggestion was, wouldn't it be cool if elves were all evil characters in literature? And it came from a fellow named Jackson. So, so I just drew this with white pencil pen on a piece of red cardstock, and then I put it into Photoshop, and I finished it digitally. So I don't know. The original is posted on my Patreon. I've also been posting the tutorials, and we're setting all the links up for it. But there's the original art for the page, and into the pile. Right? Did I throw it in the pile? Yeah, I threw it in the pile. So, so that was a pretty successful page. And as far as it goes for feeling at the end, when you're done the page and you look at it and you go, I like that, even though it's a very different type of narrative from what we were talking about yesterday. We were talking about all this stuff with panels. You can't climb up. Get back down. We were talking about using panels in order to tell a story and the different ways that we're going to do that. And then I drew a page that really doesn't have any structural panels. It's a montage image. So this more represents the single image, the splash image, the large singular panel, and has a bunch of faces montaged together, and in order to express the idea about the subject matter itself, which is elves. So felt good. One single pencil. I like these. It's a Faber-Castell pencil. White. It's the Goldfaber. All right, put that back in the container. There we go. Today's music of choice right now is the Yes. Maps is the song. Great song. Chris has joined us. Hey, Chris, welcome aboard. Welcome anybody else that's aboard and hasn't said hi yet or anything like that, or is just watching from the balcony. You're always more than welcome to do so. So right now I've got 3 tutorials prepped. 3 tutorial videos prepped. I've got one posted already on YouTube, separate from the live stuff, which talks about different surfaces to illustrate upon. And I got to put this cover image on it on that video. We'll get there. And then the second video is that's going up this afternoon. They're dragging behind the lives, right? No, you can't climb. You can't climb up. Back down. Cat Cam. Say hi to your cat cam. Look. So the second video that's going up is the mark making video, where I talked about all the different tools that we can use to make messes. And then the third video will be what we talked about yesterday, which is how to plot out a comic page using panels, and how to start to interpret and break down a page. Yes, sir. No, you got to sit down there. Come on. Sit down here and I'll pet you. How's that? I'll give you pets. All right. So this one's fun too. I mean, this is more, the image illustrates the note that we talked about during the stream. And I think that I'm completely comfortable with that sort of a methodology for showcasing what the talk was about. The links for each of these videos that are on YouTube will be going up on the Patreon as well. So I don't want our Patreon subscribers and supporters to miss anything. Chris says, back to work on Monday. I've got 3 groups full, 27 students already. So the only day you can watch the stream is Friday. Well, we'll always make Friday special for you, Chris, and we'll always leave an opening for you if you want to come and jump in and have some fun. And Chris says, Corbin. That's right, you're busted. All right. Okay, so thank you very much, everybody, for joining. Are you taking off? I'll turn off Cat Cam. You're just exploring? Yeah, it's just exploring. Okay. So today's page. being the Alps is puts us at, we're 5 days in, 5 pages in. So I'm pretty pleased that I've just, because it doesn't feel like any effort at all to put out the pages so far this year. I don't know, maybe having, been laid up on the couch here for a week and a half at the end of last year has helped me out, that it sort of rejuvenated the system here. Either way, we'll figure it out. And don't think too much about the magic, because you think too much about the magic and, suddenly you forget what the magic is. Seamlessly incorporated. Anyways, so uses no one but me. Hey, big exciting news. So let's get moving ahead. So today's page is elves, red cardstock, drawn in white pencil, and from a suggestion of elves should be the nasty characters in literature today. So thank you for that, Jackson. Now, the camera today, clickety click, is new. This we finally did it. I finally broke down and bought a proper camera. So hopefully this is going to allow lots more detail. Like already, as you see this, you can see some of the structural fidgety bits in the tissue paper. This is what I'll be doing today's page on. I just put together a mixed media surface to work on, and so that's what you see here. And but you can see the different layers of paper on the surfaces. The different surfaces on the paper is what I mean. I'm so sorry. It's they've got tissue paper that has had paint rolled over it that came to us from our good friend Didi, and then here's a stamp image that came through the stamp swap, I believe, and then I've got, this is actually a wrapper for 11 by 17. I want to say Fullscape, but it's just drawing paper for making full-size pages for comics. It's not a cardstock though, so it doesn't have the resiliency that it needs to for using mixed media on, but it's great for just sketching and penciling, especially roughs. Anyhow, so I don't have a ton of lights on around me in the studio now. There's just a simple light that surrounds the camera, a built-in mechanism, and that's all that's on top of here. And yet the autofocus and the auto clarity from this camera picks everything up. So I'm really happy because I'm bad at lighting, let's be honest. So there's our new exciting piece of business there. All right, so I hope this makes it better for everybody that's watching the streams. Okay, so today's idea that I want to talk to you about is the point of interest when you're drawing a page. And so there's a couple of different things that I wanted to show you, and I brought in a couple of books to show that are going to show different case examples for how point of interest draws the viewer's eye, where the creator of the page, the illustrator of the page, wants it to go. And and then when you have a cohesive unit, if you've got numerous cooks in the kitchen that are in the process of making a page together, when the writer writes their text, they need to be conscious of how many words that they're putting in panels and stuff like that, so that there's more ability to offer larger images or images that are more interesting or with depth in order to tell the story, because it's a cohesive thing, text and pictures. Now, with that in mind, that's considering it in a sequential Western market approach only. White paper. So here we go. This is Rupert. And Rupert is I think the earliest book that had the most affectation on me, and that I wanted to tell stories. because I enjoyed reading Rupert so much. Rupert, this is a British publication. It's absolutely phenomenal. The annuals would collect a bunch of shorts that were published in other material, other publications. But Rupert the Bear, and so there's this anthropomorphic element where you've got this half boy, half bear, and his friend the possum, but there's also little kids and adults in it, and adults, anthropomorphic characters, and then there's a whole wealth of fantastic characters like, the Kingdom of the Moon and things. Or as you see, let me hold this up a little bit. Down in the bottom of the cover, this is a toy. He's got a ball for a bottom, right? The flowers have faces. So it was just pure imaginative fantasy for kids. Now, and the art of it is absolutely elegant. John Harold's the artist that I remember from my childhood. I'm sure there's other artists doing it now, because John Harold would have to be quite old. Excuse me again for any coughing. My voice is rebuilding itself from last week. So here's the thing. This is the thing about Rupert. Rupert tells the same story in numerous different ways on every page. And so I'm using this to illustrate for you the number of different ways that you can have a cohesive fusion between text and imagery. Okay? And yet at the same time, control the interest of where you're trying to draw the reader to in the page. So Rupert and the Dragon Dance is, culturally, and, we're far more sensitive today. There was no ill or malicious intent meant in these stories. But what happens is this. Each page gives you a header. Rupert has an idea. That is the simple, declarative point of interest of this page. Once a child can figure out Rupert has an idea, they can start to figure out the rest of the page. And so the rest of the page includes a number of different other elements. One is the visual illustration of each specific action. It has a textual attachment to each of these panels, which is the text that these characters are saying. So rather than being overlaid like traditional Western sequential material, it's underneath. Okay? So there is your comic version of it. When you have Rupert has an idea, what it also gives us is the key characters of the page, right? So, here's Rupert over here. Here's the main title of the whole thing. And, and where's his friend? What's his friend's name? Peek. It's his buddy Peek the pup. So, so here we have our key characters and their interaction that'll be interacting on the page. The header title, of course, but so then here's our first approach to it is the sequential way. So we're now telling a story visually, we're now telling a story in prose, and we're telling a story in the cohesive union of the two, as well as just giving the general idea of the page, all so far. That down at the bottom, you can see these two different stanzas, two different sections of it. I wouldn't say they're paragraphs because there's not a lot of spacing here. They really wanted to accommodate as much text as they could in a limited amount of area. These two areas of text right here is yet another way of telling what's going on here. It even has the dialogue like it has below the panels. So this is, if the kids are developing their reading skills themselves, they can start here, they can move to this section. But if mom and dad are reading it to them at night, they can read, far more material to the kids than the kids would develop themselves. Now, over time, eventually, kids will move up to the third portion of the page to read that. But every Rupert page follows this formula. Rupert's pals get ready. And then it breaks down to 4 points of interest. Bill the Badger is joined, so he's been put at the top of the page. And then of course there's the stanzas down at the bottom explaining it all. So this goes on and on and on this way. But when we've got key points of interest that are larger, you can see how they'll move across the two panels. But this is Rupert. This is how they would tell stories. And there was just such a wealth of story that you could get as a kid, because you could read it in so many different ways. And even if, somebody had read it to you, more likely in this form, you can sit down and start trying to discern what's happening visually. You can sit down and start to break that. I know it's about him, Rupert's surprising chain, because I'm able to read at that level now. And then as you get more sophisticated, it builds. So this is a really great way of drawing people in on numerous levels. Now, the second part of what I want to talk about today is each of these panels has a specific point of interest that they're trying to get across. Okay, Rupert spots a flock of sheep is the title of the, is the title of this page here. Here's Rupert, here's a sheep. Rupert spots a flock of sheep. Rupert, sheep. So then in the first panel, we have Rupert, who has left the, what is it? I think it was a bed that he floated to shore on. So he's left the bed behind. So we've got the continuity from the preceding page. And here he is moving up a path. But our focal point of interest is this directional action of Rupert. Here's Rupert, here's the sheep. Straightforward. Here's Rupert following the sheep with a point of interest to draw our eye into this specific panel. And then there's the choice that Rupert has. He can either follow the sheep, or he can follow the path that says arrivals this way. So what I'm referring to when I'm talking about point of interest, and excuse me again, I'm trying to do my best here with this. All right. Now, I'll move this out of the way so that we've just got this to look at. Point of interest. Okay. Point of interest in a panel or a page. So what I'm trying to illustrate to you is, while I'm primarily talking about storytelling and sequential illustration, I'm talking about storytelling and illustrating in general. I want people to think more broadly than just thinking about Western style superhero books, because you can do so much more. The Rupert book is a prime example of that. Because you can see that there's numerous different approaches on the same existing page that are all executing the same action at different tiers. I've always suggested it's 4 tiers. You've got the idea of the page so that the kid can figure it out. Oh, okay, so now I've got a starting point. Rupert goes to the beach. And then there's the visual part of it. So a child that's early development and just not quite reading yet can look at the pictures and try to get a narrative going on in their own head. It might not be the exact narrative of the page, but they're trying. Then there's the inclusion of the prose or the dialogue underneath each of those 4 panels. That's your third, is the interplay. And then the fourth one is the verse at the bottom. So that's 4 different approaches to telling the same thing. But when it comes to point of interest in a panel or a page, we're going to go back to the 2 things that I've talked about before, the portrait and the landscape format. Now, when we're looking at either of these things, we know we need to have the movement of the eye from the top left to the bottom right of each of these pages, because we're talking about the Western format here. In the Eastern format, it's reversed. So to be the top right to the bottom left. On the right side to the left side. And in the Western market is left side to right side, top left, bottom right. Okay, now, point of interest in a panel. Depending on however many panels we have on a page, the point of interest needs to be the draw to it. So when you look at it right off the top, let's just take a blank square. This tells the eye nothing. This reads as 0. It doesn't tell us where to look. It doesn't hold us in any way. It doesn't pique any kind of curiosity. Oftentimes in stories where somebody is in the middle of a blizzard or something like that, they'll have text on blank. The novelty of it is interesting, but it quickly loses the reader. You can't sustain that for pages on end. Just come on. But where the peak point of interest is, now this comes from Alex Toth. Alex Toth he worked for Hanna-Barbera for years. He did a number of different comics for a number of different comic companies. He, drag strip comics, romance stories. He drew Wonder Woman for a few issues. He did some war books, But Alex Toth, T-O-T-H, Toth, is also the guy that worked for Hanna-Barbera and created so many of their cartoon shows and the casting characters of those. The most popular one, of course, is Space Ghost. The thing that I first came across Alex Toth was, of course, animated cartoons when I was a child, because they were always playing 60s, 70s, and even into the 80s. But the second thing was his version, his illustrations of Zorro, which is just a master class in storytelling. One of the things that Toth says is this. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to throw them at me. Now, if I look at it in either format, your eye, wherever I put the dot in this panel or in this page, wherever that dot goes is where your eye is going to go. If that dot is here, your eye is going to draw immediately to here. So that's fine. That's a simple principle. The more complicated that you get it, let's say you've got a whole bunch of circles on the page, whole bunch of details of information randomly placed that have no sense of direction to them, but if you fill in this circle, that's where your eye goes. That's your point of interest. You're automatically drawn to that, largely because of the contrast of that in correlation to the rest of the image. So understanding that is where you can, I'm going to turn off cat cam. I just realized I still got Corbin's camera on. He's not even here. So knowing that, okay, our second example, if we move over here to this third example, and the uprighter side, the landscape or portrait aspect of the page doesn't matter, so that's why I'm just going to keep flipping them around. Knowing that, we can now utilize the principle that we know, the basic principle of where we need to move the page around from the top left to the bottom right. If we take these abstract circle shapes and we place them in such a way as they move across the page, and we fill the bottom one in as black, our eye's going to do a completely different thing. And what it's going to do is it's going to follow this information down to this point of interest. The point of interest is still the draw, but because we've got this other information in the panel, your eye is naturally going to gravitate to including that into the contextual image of the page. So, direction lines, a character falling through the air, whatever it is, you're going to draw their eye. Now, let's do a character falling through the air. So if we've got a guy who's falling out of the sky, and so we've got his legs here, and they're kicking up behind him, his hand is fanned out, his other hand is equally, oh boy, I'm going. And then here's his face. See, if I was in front of a group of people, I'd say, where's your eye drawn to? But I don't expect people to type that in the chat. I'll tell you, I'll just skip ahead and tell you. The place that you're looking to, the point of interest that you're looking to, is his face. Despite the fact that your eye may well start with his feet, it may dance back and forth, okay, between the feet and the void, because your brain is trying to comprehend where is he coming from. The directional motion of the legs curled into the back like this is to suggest that he is going this way. as opposed to just free dropping because his legs would be moving up more. His legs are moving this way, which implies that course of action. But Chris has answered. Thank you, Chris. The head. Your eye is automatically drawn to his face. We have this ingrained thing in us as human beings to look for the danger, look for the predator's face, look for the eyes focusing on us, look for other individuals in order for the social engagement. We're naturally geared to that. So when this guy's falling out of here in this void of space, which could be a splash panel, which could be a singular panel in and of itself, you are automatically going to look at the noggin. And so that is yet another example of how you as a storyteller, as you as a creator, are controlling the course, the direction of the moving eye of your reader. You know, you are narrating elements with a simple image like that they may not, they take it at face value. They might not on any deeper level look at the wherefore and why of what's happening in the story. They're just trying to engage themselves in the story and try to get into the story and just focus on that part. Excuse me. I'm going to keep taking drinks while we go through. I apologize. Okay, so the second thing that Toth would say to this, as we're speaking up, as we're speaking to developing this language of holding the point of interest to the viewer, whether or not a person has a grand affinity for drawing or has taken an X amount of hours towards facilitating the development of their drawing skills is not really important here. At the end of the day, the core action, the core interest that you have is to tell the story. If you're writing, you're trying to tell the story textually. If you're illustrating it, you're trying to tell the story visually. You know, if it's something that has a combination of the two, you're trying to figure out to your advantage which parts that you can omit. If he says Bob goes to the fridge, you don't need to draw Bob going to the fridge. If he says, you know, Bob goes to the fridge to grab a sandwich. Now, and to build upon that, you can have a visual image of Bob with the fridge opened up and his head stuck inside looking around. So, because what that does is it builds on that. It's not just that Bob has gone to the fridge to look for something to eat. It's the way Bob's done it. So visually, you're telling something about the character of Bob because he stuck his head in the fridge to look for the contents in it. Most people stand back and look in a fridge. Bob has shoved his head inside of it. So you can see how even with the text and the visual image having a little bit of overlap, you can build upon and enhance it. Now, whether or not you draw that as the fanciest thing on the planet, you write that as the fanciest thing on the planet, it could be detrimental. And the reason that it can be detrimental is that if it's too verbose, if it's too explanatory, if the entire book is a soliloquy on the nature of man, you know, and you're trying to hold people's attention fixed to your grand narrative while somebody is spending 24 pages buttering toast, it's not going to work. You know, you can have very little text in a book, however, and be far more reliant on the visual aspect of it. Can you do close-up shots and leave the narrative and typing maybe? Yeah, of course you can. You can have a panel where it says, Bob woke up in the middle of the night and he's hungry. And so you can have a picture of Bob grasping the fridge door as he's about to open it. And then the next panel that you can have is just Bob's face from a side shot or from a forward shot, looking into the fridge and looking at the contents of the fridge and surveying it. You don't need to say Bob's looking in the fridge, right? But in a third panel, you can have Bob standing there frustrated, looking up, or hands on his hips, or just in this sort of exasperative, stance of slumped shoulders, or whatever you'd like. And it says, Bob didn't want to cook. So you're giving so much depth of character in there by using the text and the visual part in equal measures. So the third part that Toth speaks to, the second part that Toth speaks to after point of interest is basically, keeping it simple. KIS, right? The KISS rule. I thought you spelled KISS, Chris. I know. But people also spell Christopher Topher. So, the KISS rule, and by keeping it simple, is where we look at this panel here of we're going to call it character Bob falling from the sky, crashing through a window. Now, there's story elements that we can add in, to our image, is where you'll have broken pieces of glass moving through the space, which tells the reader broken glass flying this direction. Bob's thrown out of a window, or Bob's been launched out of a window somehow. You've got a simple image. The text that you would put with this thing, right? You don't have to say, I was thrown out of a window. There's some level of assumption of that with the viewer already, with the reader of all that already. And if the next panel is them careening towards a pavement, and you see the side of the building flashing past as they're going down, he came out of a window. We see the broken glass. He's going down the side of a building. He came out of a window. So you don't need to type that. But this gives the opportunity for the writer, because we have our point of focus, our point of interest with the visual element, the writer can then add more sophistication to the page, by saying, what do people really think about when they're falling towards the pavement? So you've got two focuses happening, and they work in relationship to one another. And you've done it in a really simplified state. Now, simplified state is our starting point. If you want to have the most beautiful drawing ever made of this fella in this shape moving down towards the ground, go for it. Why not? If your skill set leans towards that, and embrace the development you've had. But you don't have to have it to get across the same story. This is why oftentimes you'll hear people say, and who's your favorite artist? And someone, in whatever, in literature, in book illustration or comics or whatever, and they'll say somebody, you'll go, really? I always find that guy's drawings like really basic. Except simplification can often be far more difficult to execute than all kinds of interesting lines and shapes and things in the shot. Prime examples of this would be Bill Watterson for Calvin and Hobbes. Calvin's standing there in a tree, and the tree is relatively floating free in space. You get the idea that there's wisps of grass around the base of it, that it's planted firmly on the ground, because we understand from association, we've seen trees with grass around the bottom of them. We can fill in the blank. But he does it with simple lines. Mike McDowell is another great example for a storyteller who uses a simplistic approach to the information that he puts inside of a panel. And I highly recommend you checking out his work. He adapted Fafud and the Grey Mouser into comic form, which is fantastic folklore tales. And Chris says, the drawing can be beautiful, but yes, if the narrative technique is confusing, you can't follow the storyline. Do you remember, here's a question for people. Excuse me again. Do you remember when you read a novel or novella when you were young, and there would be a spot illustration and said novel novella, but depending on where the publisher put that spot illustration within the confines of that chapter, you have got, let's say, Sherlock Holmes, and he's opening a box on the mantle or whatever, and he's looking inside, and what he's actually doing is about to take out a pinch of snuff or basically nicotine. And while it's saying that, it says underneath the panel, I could tell when he walked in the room that he had a knife concealed in his jacket or something along those lines. There's no correlation between, he could tell when he came in the room this, and him standing in front of a sifter, and standing in front of a pouch of tobacco or whatever. I guess at a box. It doesn't connect. And as elegantly and beautifully illustrated as it might have been, it's out of place for that sequence of events that's told to us in the verse of the chapter. So, that's a problematic placement. And when you get to that point where the person says, will you do this for me or not? And Sherlock Holmes stands up, walks over to the mantle and takes out some tobacco and or some snuff and engages in it and turns around and says, why did you bring a revolver to the meeting? Oh, well, now we get it. Now we understand the context of it. And then it says, at the end of the chapter, Watson says, how did you know that man had a revolver? It says, I could tell he had a revolver in his pocket when he came in the door. Well, there's the other half of the information we're previously supplied. That's just a bad way of locating information together. It doesn't, they're trying to equate the entirety of a scene, but they're only giving us it in segments, and those segments don't link. So we've lost the point to it. We've lost the point of interest that we're supposed to be focusing on. Now, if you had a picture of Sherlock Holmes with the pouch of tobacco or with the container of tobacco in his hands, and he gestures towards the person sitting in the chair and says, having taken a snuff of tobacco, Sherlock confronted his visitor, why did you bring a gun in with you? While it might not necessarily be those three courses of actions like discussed, and specifically as they happen in the verse, that's the point. Right? So you can do it with spot illustration with a simple line of text as well. But you've got to figure out the principal point. And if it takes it from three different parts of an action, that's fine. Principal point. So we've got a guy falling out of the window. If we think creatively with our shots, if we think creatively with the action as it's happening, then what it can tell us, what it can equip us with, is moving forward in the narrative. Now, so what we need to look at is if we've got a picture of Bob, he's got one hand behind him, he's got one hand in front of him, he's got his one leg up, he's got his one leg down. Okay? Bob is running. Now, if Bob is running, even though we've captured only one part of Bob's running action, and ideally there's lots of different ways that people run. So when you're drawing somebody running, think about how they're running. Don't just have a go-to, this is how a person looks when they run. Because there's all kinds of different ways that we can example action and kineticism in the running posture of the characters that we draw. But if he's got these long strides and he's just, and his head's tilted slightly, and you can see that there's, if you get more complicated in your drawing, you see there's sweat on his brow or, a strained face, you're really selling that this is quite aggressive running. But if it's, he's got a goofy face on and his head's tilted, in the opposite direction, he's like, he's running like a lunatic, then illustrate that. Play with it. But the point of the whole action is He is running. Do we want to show where he's running from? Or do we want to show where he's running to? So objective-based movement in the panel is more beneficial. If you draw this panel of Bob, and Bob's, he's got his one hand up, he's got his one hand down, he's got his one leg up, he's got his other leg down, and Bob is running across the panel. It doesn't sell as strongly as this does. And the reason that this sells is more powerful is because we have him in a space, a volume of space, and it's not just confined to a small area. This requires more in the background for us to understand the context of Bob running. So if you have, and again, this can be done open panel, this can be done just floating figure, it can be, but ideally, if you move the panel out in this way and add more space to either side of it, you can show where he's starting and you can show where he's finishing. You can really play with that and execute those visual elements in lots of fun different ways. You can have, here's a picture of Bob's house at one side of the thing and on the other of the drawing, and on the other side here you've got the church that Bob goes to on the other side. And then it looks like there's a circle at this end and a circle at this end, and it looks like a line on a map. And then you've got Bob running across the top of it, right? So you've exaggerated and really abstractly put down, one interpretation of telling the action of a person moving from place A to place B. You can also have dramatic action of Bob running in a far more physical way, where he's moving through the space as he's going to the church building. And he's running, down this path that's the line recedes to the front of the church. So Chris says, if he's escaping, people might want to see the danger or monster. If the narrative is quest, maybe drawing the place he wants to reach, right? Yeah, that's exactly it. You can also do things like to impose a sense of dread or to impose a heightened sense of tension, an emotional tension. You can draw the picture of Bob's elbow moving like so, and his second arm is pumping forward, and we've cut that shot right down, and then we've got Bob who's looking over his shoulder, eyes of fear, as he's looking back to see what's chasing him. So we know for a fact something's after Bob. We can introduce the shot from this context. But there's so many things that we can do in the course of an action. But you want to consider all of those things we talked about in the last tutorial we had about figuring out how to break down this panel or break down this story using these visual approaches, the panels, etc. We talked in that about when you're looking at the script, you got to figure out what that tone is. And as soon as you understand what that tone is of the project that you're drawing, the second part of that is you want to consider, how do I keep that point of interest? How do I keep that focus on tension? How do I keep that focus on exuberance? If you draw the same story with Bob and a bunch of his friends, and they're in the midst of a world where everything's a musical, and they're having this exhilarating dance and song number about, inebriation. I don't know what it is, but you don't want to show the tension part. You want to show the exuberance of the characters. And so you want to try to figure out how you can, as the director, as a cinematographer of your story that you're illustrating, you want to try to think about how can you sell that across visually. So you need to have all those elements right at the start on your script. But maybe you start drawing and you discover it's better to change the shot. Yeah, always. That's incredibly common. You can sit down with a piece of paper and you can You can break it down in 4 ways and do a rough scribble, a rough little doodle. You've got your script right here. Let's say if you're working from a script or some sort of, or a synopsis of what the story is that you have to get across. There's 2 different ways of the pre-supplied written material too. One is script, one is plot. Okay, we talked about these things in yesterday's tutorial. So either one of these 2 ways that you've supplied this material, you look in here and see what's the principal course of action. Okay, it's a mob careening through Main Street because their hockey team won, and for some reason that makes them want to go crazy in the streets of downtown and break the windows of a bunch of businesses, which is a thing that happens. How do I illustrate that? What if that's the principal action? I'll make a note of that to myself, right? And then I look at the key points of what's going on the page. Ideally, I read ahead in whatever's pre-supplied material I've got, if it's a script, if it's a plot, whatever it is. Plots are better because you don't have to have this specific course of things laid out for you by a non-artist, right? By a writer. Because oftentimes writers will go and they'll miss a beat and they'll realize that, so-and-so, kicks open the door of his shack and starts his way up in the mountain. And when he's at the top, okay, so how do I sell the fact that he just climbed this cliff face or the side of this mountain? That's a sort of faux pas when you're not thinking from a visual aesthetic. So you sit down with a piece of paper like this and start figuring out different ways to illustrate this action and different shapes and panels that you can use, like we talked about yesterday, in order to do so. But what you need to think about, you've got your central point of the page, or action of the page, right? But then you need to break it down into its key points along the way, or key actions along the way, depending on what language you prefer to use. Mob goes to the street breaking windows, and our character is among them. So then you ask the questions about your character. Is he actively participating in it? Is your character trying to stop them from doing so? Is your character just trying to move the other characters that are in the narrative that he's got to get to safety despite all the craziness around him? You ask those questions in between. And then you figure out those key points that need to be included during the central point itself. So while you can have the mob doing all the things that are doing, in your storytelling, you want to focus on what you're trying to convey to the reader of what's happening, what's the more important scene that's happening. It's not just an entire page of a mob smashing a city apart. And if it is an entire page of a mob smashing a city apart, ideally the text says something more than just that. Ideally, the writer would utilize that space to talk about, this primitive instinct in man in order to control their environment. And when they get overexcited, they can destroy it as easy as they can build it up. Maybe there's some grand narrative like that moving through it. But you want to, and you can take this page, if you break it down into 4, and you can come up with a whole bunch of different ways of drawing the same thing. Right? What am I missing? But what if you visualize a perfect shot for your narrative, but technically your skills cannot produce the drawing you see in your mind's eye? That just happened to me. You've come up with the shot, okay? So in the narrative, you have come up with the shot, the perfect shot. Let's call it this, okay? There's the perfect shot, right? There's the information in the shot and the story and then there's the technical part of it. And how can you work with those 2 things? Now, my first time picking up a camera to direct a movie, I'm not going to be Gerald Ford, the director. I'm just not. this is a person who had a great deal of skill and development of skill over the course of a career. However, to hear Gerald Ford talking about a shot is really basic. It's all really basic when you think about it. Let me walk you through it. Orson Welles was a theater director and a radio play director when he went to California, to Hollywood, to direct his first film. He sat down for a day and a half, I think he said 2 days, with a cinematographer that was chosen to work on this project with him. And the cinematographer said, look, because they had some experience under the belt, and they said to this young 25-year-old, 26-year-old Orson Welles, look, kid. Orson said to him, walk me through the basics of filmmaking. That's my Orson Welles impression. Walk me through it, and I will know what needs to be done. Right? So, the cinematographer sat down with him a day and a half, 2 days. And they literally walked through all the different movements of camera and shots and key parts of framing, and then the upper body, and then the middle side. You can't see my hands disappeared in the camera, but there's your facial shot, there's your portrait shot, which includes right the bottom of this frame, and then there's your there's 2/3 of the way through the body, and then there's the waist up. Like there's all these different ways you can pull out on a character for intensity and for diffusion of taking away intensity. He walked Orson Welles through all this stuff, and they did Citizen Kane. You can have a grand approach of technical ability. You can have a grand approach of developed skill and still not be able to draw that perfect shot. But you can also have a basic starting point, and you know what this shot is, and ideally you'd love it to look a certain way. Just try to draw it in its simplest form and the simplest essence of it. There's a shot where I've got my cowboy guy standing here, and he's got his hand floating over here above his hip, and as here's his gun. His other hand is off to the side, and he's looking across the way at Black Bart, and over here is, in the far distance of the shot, is Black Bart, and he's got his black hat on, and now this is really rudimentary and basic, and yet this shot tells so much key information. Is it perfectly illustrated? No. Could it be illustrated in a far more elegant way with more interesting perspective or little things like that, like just a little twist to it? Yeah, it could, even if you're able to do something as simply as you've got your horizon shot that moves through here, and you've got your buildings that are all standing up alongside the shot as they move across here. So here we go. We got our shootout at the old K Corral. We got our lines of interest that are pulling the attention for the viewer so that they're watching him face off him. And in this case scenario, the villain's probably doing more talking because we're looking at the villain. If we're having our hero tech, well, listen here, Black Bart, I'm going to have to shoot you down in the streets. Well, ideally, we want to see our hero in the white hat. The colors mean nothing, but our hero, who we've dressed in white, is saying, Bob, I'm going to have to shoot you because you've been a bad Bob. And the Bob who's all dressed in black says to him, I'd like to see you try, feller. It's simplifying the image is the key thing in storytelling. If you want to readdress something that you draw in X amount of time because you've developed a better skill set and you think you can do it better, power to you. I would arguably say, rather than continually readdressing past perceived failures, that we try to incorporate those ideas that we thought were the perfect essence of the thing in the future things that we're working on. This drawing of these two guys facing off with guns in the center of town could be better. Well, a few years from now, I'm doing a story involving samurais facing off in in the center of the village. And, you know, they've both got their blades drawn and they're facing each other. But now I've got this better understanding of perspective. I've got this better understanding about physical movement. So it's not two people standing with their hands, their arms out, you know, straight-handed with their arms at their side, rather than holding the guns, because I can't draw people with their hands holding guns. I'm going to have them floating over like they're about to shoot each other. Well, your skill develops over time, and so you've got this wonderfully nuanced piece where the one guy's looking here, and you have a secondary shot where it shows the camera angle from here, where he's like, "You will die," you know. And the guy says, "No, you'll die first, Bob." But as you develop in your skill set, that perfect shot is going to look more perfect on projects as you go along. It's not to say that you're going to become more sophisticated in your abilities and still look back at those shots, those earlier shots, and said, I got something there. I captured the essence of something there that I don't think I've been able to capture in projects since. What was it that I did? So allow that. But the point of interest, and then the point of interest in the perfect shot here, draws all of our attention to the bad guy, the bad character. All the angles, all the movement is moving towards them, all the directional lines, the buildings, the perspective, you know, the intention of the other principal character that's in it. If you draw the couch, the crowd shot, you got all these people standing by and on the front of their porches and leaning on a post with a roof or whatever it is, or mother with her hands on her little guy's shoulders, covering his eyes. Look away, Timmy. This is terrible. You know, whatever it is, all of these characters, they need to be looking at these two right here. They don't need to be going, "Hey, is it gonna rain?" That misses the point of interest. There's always a person in a crowd who's doing something else. "Oh, wow, there's a car crash in front of me, but it's a weird looking building." When it's real life, it's there. But when it's a narrative element that we're trying to develop to draw our viewers' attention, we want that guy looking at what's going on and not the building. So if the more complex that you get over time, and then you draw somebody in the foreground and she's holding her little umbrella thing, and you got a silhouette of another guy's back of his head, you know, and there's one beside them. However more complex you get over time with that image, that perfect shot, that comes with time. It comes with this experience and skill. All of this, though, all of this extra stuff that I've added is not the important part. The important part is always going to be the key point of interest in that panel, which may well be, in the case of two guys face each other in a gunshot or gunfight, that's probably the key point of interest in the whole page. It may well be the key point of interest in the entire story. It doesn't have to be complex. It doesn't have to be the most fantastically illustrated image that you've ever seen. I showed you the Rupert book at the beginning of our talk today, and that Rupert book is a very simple style of illustration, and yet it's an absolute example of storytelling. You know, Rupert gets out of the bed that he has floated, which for whatever reason he was sailing in the sea with, and it is now gently slid to the shore on the previous page. Well, in that first shot, we see in the bottom corner the bed and footprints in the sand, and Rupert starting his way up a stone staircase and up a hill. That tells us everything that we need to know for that course of action. Started here, go in there. He's possibly wet and you know, heavy-footed. There's all these little key pieces of information that over time we can tell, but it doesn't need to be grand or really complicated artwork when you just want to get it across. So allowing yourself to attempt to tell a story when you have not developed a big fancy art style is a benefit. And the reason that it's a benefit is, why are you drawing a story? Because the whole point of drawing a story is you're telling a story. It's storytelling. It's as simple as that. You can have absolutely complicated and fantastic illustrators that cannot tell a story. I give a hard time on things like 90s Western comics. And I know a lot of people are really hyped up on them, and they think that this is a grand time in sequential literature. But that's just because that's the stuff they grew up in their youth. And the market hyped and built it all up to be a great thing. But there are some of the artists in there, while they're fantastically cool artists, they're bad storytellers. They're really bad storytellers. A lot of people, when the Image Comics started, a lot of people, Jim Valentino was at least 10 years senior to all the other guys that started this Image company. And they went on to do Spawn, I pronounced the W, and, it'd be Jim Lee, Willis Patasio, and all these other guys, really fantastic artists. But Jim Valentino's the best storyteller. He did Guardians of the Galaxy in the 80s for Marvel. Very 80s style of art, but brilliant storytelling. He could get so much more visual storytelling on a page than any of those guys could ever hope to do. You knew where everybody was going, you knew what everybody was doing. Another artist that is in Canada here that I don't think gets enough credit is an artist named Tom Grummett. I had the chance to meet Tom a few years back, he and his wife, really nice people. Tom Grummett did Robin for DC, amongst a million other things, Superboy as well, I believe. And brilliant storyteller. Is he the fanciest artist? Is he the most popular artist? No. But very talented storyteller. Very, very talented. I can't sing his abilities of storytelling high enough. And yet people are, Jim Lee. Jim Lee's great, and Jim Lee tells great stories, but Tom Grummett tells better stories. Like, Tom Grummett is equipped as an illustrator to more functionally tell a story than some of the Image guys. And yet, those Image books, any of those creators, they far outsell everybody else. A lot of people remember Spawn, Todd McFarlane. A lot of people remember the Spawn comic being so good from when Greg Capullo was drawing it. He was far, far more equipped as a storyteller. Just had a better affinity for it. What's Chris saying here? I need to find my movie notes from college. I had a fantastic cinematographer as a teacher. Oh, that's a blessing. If you're telling stories, you need to think visually. You simply do. You need to be able to translate whatever the story itself is, the text, the myth, the old, folklore tale that you're trying to interpret, the lyrics to Blue Suede Shoes by Elvis. Whatever you're trying to adapt to a visual element, your principal interest is the story, conveying the story. The rest of it is benefit. The rest of it is all added to it. It's the same thing for a writer, as wonderfully, lyrical a writer's words are in a story that they write. If the writer doesn't get the story across, I don't care about their poeticism. What's the story? This is why certain people make fantastically audacious visual films. Zack Snyder, J.J. Abrams. Oh, big visual spectacles. But the story's lacking in their projects. It just is. Great ideas for stories. Bad storytelling. Because you can't rest your story on spectacle. Your story, if it doesn't come across to the viewer, what? what are they supposed to do with that? We just watched a film together that had Ethan Hawke and Julia Roberts in it. Those are the two principal characters. It's far better. Some of the other actors that are in are far more interesting to me in that piece. But this film that we just watched is people at a cottage, and then signals start. The Wi-Fi is gone, and there's no more telephone, and the society's falling apart. And there's some really interesting moments and some really interesting pieces of information, but they're so tersely spread, so sprinkled in the whole project. It's so minor in comparison to the flashy thing of, that's more interesting to show a plane or a big giant boat, crashing towards the shore where your family's sitting on a beach, than it is for you to have anything to say towards the fullness of characters. There's two characters and are missing a loved one, the third part of their immediate family. It's mentioned at the beginning, and it's mentioned at the end. It's like, where's the story for that? You're in this point of crisis, and your two characters completely forgot about the third of their triumvirate. This isn't losing a dog. And where did that spot go at the end of the season for the Brady Bunch? This is far worse than that. This is parents forgetting a child, or I don't want to give away the film, so it's not parents forgetting a child. It's another triumvirate, but it's bad, not the greatest storytelling. And so I found the book. We see when you look at the book and then you look at that film, there's all these changes that are nonsensical changes that took away the storytelling. Doesn't make any sense. It was produced by Obama, the former American president. So he put some notes in and said how things should be. Maybe go back to the story, instead of whatever. I think it should be this way. Well, you're not the writer. But the money talks. So when you're looking at your point of interest in a panel or in a page, so I think the basic things that I want to come across to you is in your story, okay, what is the key point? Okay, whether it's the key point of interest or if it's a more action-based or physical thing, what is the key point of action? Okay? Now, everything in that story needs to work towards or around that. Batman and the Joker face off in The Dark Knight. The film starts with a bunch of guys robbing a bank, and the conclusion of robbing a bank is the introduction of the bad guy, the Joker, because it's the second of a trilogy of films. The first film told us who the good guy is, told us who Batman is. We don't need to introduce him like that at the beginning. We know who he is. So that when he does show up, it's a continuance of the previous film and the character that was set up there. It's not a completely different version of him. It's a continuance of the established character. So when you're introducing, in a case like Batman, The Dark Knight, the bank robbery ends with the bad guy going, hello, here I am. And, okay, so now we know the level things are operating at. And then the entirety of the piece is established about what's the key point of interest. And the key point of interest is these two are fighting for the future of a city. One is fighting for his perceived way of how a city should be. And the other person not only likes it the way it is, but he wants to make it worse, you could say. And in between that all, there's these other characters that exemplify certain things, certain traits in it, and they're including a character that basically they're fighting over this character, this two-sided character. Anyways, key point of interest in the action. The whole story has to be built around that. And in the course of the whole key point of interest or the key point of action, that central point, right? Or central point. And the central plot, what's the central motivator? And after that is all of the structure of key points or actions leading to or building around it. So whatever you're illustrating, whatever you're telling, whatever your story or structure is, whatever the larger piece is about, it has got to develop this in order to get that across. And when you start thinking about the central point of interest in a panel or a page, that the page, and I'm going to put in parentheses, I'm going to put an S, that page or pages, okay, is a point. This point is Bob falling out of a window. The next page, the point is what happens. Does Bob land? Does Bob hit a bunch of things, fall, as he falls down an alleyway and it ends with him inside of a dumpster? Does Bob do some magic thing where he grabs electrical wires as he's coming down and swings his way to safety? But that could be a secondary page. I mean, you've got Bob, if you've done this dramatic image like we showcased over here in number 4, Bob going out the window, then you want to take a second page to tell Bob landing, or whatever course of actions happen for Bob to get to the ground. Or does Bob just die? Whatever that key point of thing is, each page is an action. Each page contains an action. Now, when your storytelling becomes more sophisticated over time, you can be far more editorial with your story, but you're still trying to convey key points. So if you're more editorial in your depiction of the events, you can have a page that says, Bob was born in a canoe, as his parents were traveling into the heartland of America. And while mother, took care of the young'un, dad built a basic shelter for them to live in. So panel 1, panel 2. You can be far more editorial on a page and show this massive transference of time, or this massive little smatterings of actions in a tighter narrative in order to really catch up the story here. That's one of the biggest cheats in film is at the start of Star Wars. The start of Star Wars there's 2 ways that we could do this. We could show it, or we just tell people and bring them up to speed. So the start of the Star Wars movie says, it was a dark time in the Republic, in the galaxy. And it just shows this text moving off into the distance. That brings us, here's the general idea of what's going on and where we're starting. Here's the general contextual narrative. And then as the camera turns down and here's the spaceship that's got all these bullets shooting around it, as a larger spaceship is chasing it as they're passing this desert planet. So but you've already established bad guys are chasing the good guys because they stole some plants. Okay, right? But that's, if you were to break that down in a story, here's your text page, which is the tightest editorial you're ever going to see for synopsizing a galactic conflict. Well, there's probably better examples, but the moment you turn that page, you've got the planet, and what one panel, part of a panel, whatever it is, and then you've got your rebel cruiser, as it's getting shot, and you're trying to visually break down what's happening there. Or you can just immediately have a ship getting rocked as it's passing this planet with bullet zaps all around it, and then the next panel, you flip the cut shot, and here's the cruiser coming towards the frame with this massive ship behind it, and really draw the reader in. But the course of action, that first page would be all the text, and then that second page would be trying to do what that immediate image does in a page to draw us into the film, the rebels being chased by the Empire. Anyways, point of interest. The story is all about storytelling. You want to tell the key point of interest, the key plot point, the key motivating factor of the story. Everybody's looking for the magic object. Everything around that needs to lead up to or build around it. So as you're introducing those characters, you want to introduce what their motivation is into the whole situation. If you're introducing scenes and scenarios, like the place where the object is kept, all of it needs to service the story. If you've got the bad guy, for doing a cut shot to a bad guy sitting in his office saying to somebody across from him, "They're never going to get my magic object," smoking a cigar, looking out a window, and the other person sitting in a chair says, "They're not going to get it because I'm your guy that keeps people from getting it." So now we're doing this development into those characters while we're, explaining, here's why it's going to be so tough to do that thing. But again, all these key things lead towards the central plot. Okay, there you go. Center point of interest on a panel or a page. I got the book over here, and I got a suggestion here from Joshua Kemble. Horses. That's my own writing. Horses in a Colosseum full of people. Okay, that is, I'm fixing my R so I don't start drawing houses in a Colosseum full of people. So that is what I'm going to work on this weekend and have posted for Monday. I'll be using this piece of paper to do it on. It's got a bunch of tissue paper on it. It's got a wrapper from a paper package. It's got a printed image on wallpaper. And it's on a heavy grade piece of cardstock that I've affixed all this material to make up this image. And that is what I'll be doing to post up for Monday morning. If anybody's watching this and has feedback for me, has anything that if you're enjoying these, let me know. If you would sooner I just draw pages, let me know. I'm just trying to get across a number of different ideas to sort of walk people through storytelling, story making. And I hope they're of help to folks. I really do. But if people would just prefer I can just do these as videos on my own on the side, but and I could just spend our time during the week writing and illustrating a one-page story based on a suggestion purely. Let me know. Please do. Chris is going to be streaming with Miriam Sunday, 7:40 a.m. in the morning, EST. Oh my gosh. Okay, great. Look forward to seeing that. All right, thank you everybody for coming and joining in. Start my channel, move to Hertz. Okay. All right, well, if you get a chance, check out Chris and Miriam this weekend on Sunday. I know Paul Pate does stuff on Saturday morning, and there'll be other things that people will be posting over the course of the weekend. Always take a look for those things, and if you're interested in the creative processes of people and to see what they're doing, by all means. Thank you, Chris, and thank you everybody else for interacting during the stream today. Yeah, I'm having a lot of fun doing these. I hope they're of benefit to people, and I'm going to continue doing some more. I've got all kinds of ideas that I want to bring across to folks to think about in a larger scope when it comes to storytelling, or even illustrating a static image with text under it, like just a single one of those panels that I showed at the start of the talk from the Rupert book. Okay? There's so much that we can do with story. It's just about exploration, as it is with everything else. Okay, bye for now. Thanks for coming out.